Hello, I'm Larry Butler. Okay, now I'm not going to stand here and tell you that Charles Darwin was wrong. I think he certainly had a 19th century point of view, which certainly places him at a disadvantage compared with the 20th century scientists, microbiologists, mathematicians, nuclear physicists, archaeologists, paleontologists, a whole gamut of people that have worked and cataloged and studied life, largely based on clues given to them by Charles Darwin. Okay, now the theory that I've developed is based upon the work of these 20th century scientists. Okay, it's not a creationist point of view in the sense that we have the popular debate going on between creationists and evolutionists today. In fact, my feeling is that the theory that I'm presenting will prove both sides of this argument to be fundamentally wrong. And that point alone, if I can convince you of it, makes what I'm talking about worthwhile. Okay, it's something new, it's something exciting, it's topical, and time alone will prove the correctness of it. So please bear with me. Sit through the 40 minutes or so of this tape. Thank you. Now the premise for our discussions is going to be based upon a relationship between paradox and life. Paradox as relates to life. Okay, now what I have to establish is a mutual point of view between you and I regarding how life comes from paradox. All right? Now what leads to this conclusion or premise that life comes from paradox? Well, the DNA molecule itself, okay, the molecule of life, the genetic code, comes from paradox. Okay, now to help us establish this mutual point of view, I'd like to make a sketch. Okay, we'll have a line here. On one side of the line we have paradox. Okay, paradox stretching off into that paradox itself, infinity. On this side of the line we'll have our perceived world. Okay? Now the perceived world is everything that we sense, everything that we can understand. Okay? It's in a paradox is those things that we don't understand. I guess an appropriate paradox for this discussion is the question of, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, that's paradoxical. All right, now, is there any kind of link, tangible link between the paradoxical and our perceived world? Well, I believe there is. Okay? What we have is a molecule in the form of a double helix of DNA. Okay, now this molecule was discovered or identified in 1953 by Crick and Watson at Cambridge University. Okay, their identification of this molecule, this configuration of a molecule. Okay. Prior to their identification of this configuration, it was, people knew that there was a genetic code. They just couldn't figure out how it was implemented. Okay. And what we have here is a double helix that can reproduce itself exactly. Okay, so this configuration enables the exact duplication of the code every time a cell divides in your body. Okay. And what we want to consider, though, is that this code is not a haphazard affair. All right, it's made up of in the DNA molecule, we're dealing with 4 smaller molecules, which the first letter of their names, which I won't attempt to pronounce here, they're called nucleotides, but the first letter of their names is what's normally used in representing the genetic code. It's A, G, C, and T. Okay, these 4 letters are the basis for all life within our perceived world. These 4 letters are used to code sequences for the creation of protein. Okay, each of there are 64 possible combinations of the 4 letters. Only 20 of those combinations are used. The 20 combinations identify the 20 amino acids in the body. A few other combinations are used as punctuation marks in the code. Okay, so through all along this molecule, we have combinations of this code, basically writing a 20-character alphabet of amino acids. How long is it? Well, in a human being, it's the DNA molecule, the coding, the individual codones in there, number in the millions. How long does it take the code to execute in a human being? Well, somewhere in the order of 16 years for most of it to happen. Well, just imagine if we were an archaeologist in a cave, and we were to find a code like this in the stone on the wall of the cave. What would we do? First thing we would do is we'd say, well, somebody wrote the code. We would, if we couldn't identify the civilization that wrote it, we would say, well, some unknown civilization wrote the code. And then we'd set about trying to decode it and identify who wrote it. Now, in the case of DNA, it seems that something else has happened. Molecular biologists have set about trying to decode the code. They generally don't concern themselves too much with who wrote the code. All right, now that's what we're going to address is how was the code written? Well, you might say, the theory of evolution is that somehow a little bit of the code came together accidentally billions of years ago in the turmoil that existed at the time. And then that little bit of the code was hit by a cosmic ray, bango, like that. And that changed the code and also improved it at the same time. Okay, and this went on for a long, long time until finally we got some living organisms out of all this. And then this is where Darwin comes in, and he would say, well, now the improvements in the code come about because of survival of the fittest. If this cosmic ray happened to give an organism with this piece of code an advantage over another organism in the same environment, this is an environmental advantage, perhaps an ability to stand a higher temperature or a higher pressure, or to consume and digest a more abundant food, then that damaged, the organism possessing the damaged code would predominate. Survival of the fittest. That's the way the theory goes, okay? Well, I won't debate that now, but I do want to consider an alternative. Okay, now based primarily upon the work of a gentleman by the name of Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote a book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach. Okay, based on his book, which is a bear to read, by the way, I have come to the conclusion, well, basically the way I interpret what he's saying is that how the code was written leads to paradox. In other words, by examining the code, by identifying it as an ordered code, an intelligent code, he never says it couldn't have happened accidentally. Rather, he leads us to paradox. Okay, now, the thing he doesn't say, which I would like to say, is I believe the code, the basis for the code, comes from within paradox itself. Okay, so we have kind of a mirror image situation. We exist over here, we enjoy the perceived world. We have identified and studied this thing for 20 years, and it has led us to this point. Now what? Well, I want to just jump across and say, all right, the basis for the coding comes from over here and not from around here. Okay? Current theories with the theory of the ray and the survival of the fittest and so on, mutations, okay? Chromosomal mutations, all maintain that the essential aspects of the progress of this coding come from our environment, from the Earth itself, from outer space, okay? The improvements of the code are all due to things that we can perceive. Okay, now what the point of view I want us to develop, I think it's revolutionary, and I guess I want you to bear with me. You have to overcome a few intuitive objections to what I'm going to say next, okay? Basically, I am claiming that the code was written by someone, just as any code written in stone on Earth would immediately be attributed to someone, to a civilization. I'm going to maintain that the code is defined and written by a society existing within paradox itself. Okay, now what do we mean by that? Well, simply all I mean is that the developers and the writers of the code are outside of our perception. Therefore, we can't see them, we can't talk to them, we can't touch them. And that's kind of hard to take. Okay. Now, if you can accept that, just long enough to see the kinds of thinking that you can develop from that point of view, I think you can become comfortable with the idea that there's someone's, not singular. That's another part of the theory. I'm not saying there's an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent being over here that generates the code. I don't think the evidence indicates that. Okay, what we're going to say is that there are individual natures over here, and they are natural, not supernatural. Superhuman, but not supernatural. They write the code, make it evident to us just recently, 20 years ago, in our perceived world. Well, why would they do this? I think we can get around to that. I think we can hypothesize on why someone over here would want to write a code to do things over here. Okay, basically, the reason for it is utility. They do want to do things over here. Okay. Now, the necessary traits. Big computer program, so complex that we can't understand it in its entirety. The fundamental aspects of how it does its thing, we cannot comprehend. Okay, now what? So one of the necessary characteristics, if you're going to write a program like that, is to be able to write the program or to comprehend it. Okay, so I'm going to say these people over here were super programmers. Double M, again, super programmers. Now, what else do they have to be able to do? Well, one of the things that I think they had to be able to do also reveals to us why they've done it. Okay. Okay, on the negative side, I would conclude that the people over here cannot manipulate matter in our perceived world very well. Okay? What I'm going to say is that they can barely manipulate matter in our perceived world. Okay? So we'll give them credit for only one capability in the area of manipulating matter. The only thing they could do, we'll say, is manipulate the hydrogen atom. That's the fundamental basis for all matter as we know it. Okay, so they could manipulate the hydrogen atom. Now I'm making this as an assumption. There may be things so tiny that we cannot perceive them. Paradoxical things about all atoms that they can manipulate, rather than directly manipulating hydrogen. But this will paint a little more graphic picture for everybody. We'll assume they can move the hydrogen atom around. It's the lightest atom there is. Okay. Has the smallest forces. Okay. Some large forces here in this DNA. Now, what else? Well, one of the other necessary traits was they must have had a desire for some reason to move matter. 1, 2, 3. Desire to move matter around as we perceive it. Big hunks of matter. Truckloads of dirt, lots of matter. Bend iron, form iron. What else? Number 4. And this is kind of the last one, okay? They had to have the knowledge somehow to make use of the raw materials of our environment. Okay, now, our scientists claim, and I guess I believe, is that before there was any life, there were a lot of raw materials floating around on Earth, okay? Say 5 billion years ago, at some point there was water. A lot of water. Lots of rocks, lots of volcanoes, lightning. Electric discharges, that's lightning. Cosmic radiation bombarding the Earth. No oxygen, okay? No oxygen at all. Free oxygen. There was oxygen in the water, oxygen in the rocks. The atmosphere, if there was any, was methane gas. Lots of ammonia and nitrogen floating around in that. So that's where they started from, okay? Building blocks available in the environment billions of years ago before life. Well, there were some others. According to laboratory experiments, if you pass a high voltage or electric discharge through a certain kind of mixture of water and chemicals that are hypothesized to have existed before life, what you get is amino acids. Remember, we mentioned amino acids. This coating uses amino acids to build proteins. Okay, so we're going to say that these people did not have to build their own amino acids. What they did was they said, we've got them. They're on Earth, in the waters. At least a sufficient amount to start this code. So they had to recognize the fundamental building blocks of life. Well, recognize the raw materials in the environment. Jogging the line, okay, where did they recognize these things? They recognize it in our perceived world. All right, so now what we have here is just about the only thing these individuals had to be capable of, or the only capabilities that we have to recognize that they had. They had to be super intelligent, super programmers. They had to be able to manipulate matter in at least a minute way. Perhaps they could directly manipulate the hydrogen atom. They had to have a desire for some reason, which we'll develop later, to move large pieces of matter within our world. Matter of fact, our world is matter. Okay? Probably it's a subset of this world. So we are aware of matter, not that stuff. Okay, and they were constrained to use the raw materials available to them within an Earth environment. They couldn't make nothing out of nothing, and they couldn't really push heavy elements around to establish strong bonds between the atoms to even create the amino acids. Okay, so they recognized within the raw material what they needed to do the code. Okay, so this is their capability. Capabilities, okay. Their goal, we've already mentioned, was to manipulate matter. Well, now what? Okay, they were faced with a, I know what I'll do. We got to give them a name. Well, where did they exist? I'm claiming that they existed within paradox itself. Maybe we call them the paradoxians. That's kind of long. Why don't we call them, what could we call them? Well, we'll call them paradons. Maybe I just coined a phrase. I hope that's not in the dictionary as something ridiculous. I don't think it is. So, paradons, okay. Now, what have I done? I've gotten us into a situation where you could accuse me of being a creationist. It's kind of obvious I'm going to lead up to the point I've already mentioned where life within our perceived world, it was created via this code by someone on the other side of paradox. Now I'm calling them the paradons. Immediately get visions of individuals waltzing around over there. Well, I am saying that they created life. What I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that they're supernatural. I'm saying they're superhuman. They're normal, natural beings. We can't perceive them. And I'm not even going to try to explain them beyond the capabilities that I said were necessary for them to do this. Okay, we are limited by this line. We perceive nothing and can describe nothing accurately on that side of the line. Okay, we're ready for a few closing remarks. And at this point, I guess I'll have to assume that you can be comfortable with the concept of paradons. Okay, now taking it from there, I guess the essential aspect of what we're dealing with here is that the creation of life involved more than a little mud, spit, and breath. Involved more than millions and millions of years of accident in the Earth environment. Okay, the essentials of life, really, as we perceive it, are a few abstract concepts, okay? Now, where did the abstract concepts come from? All right, the superintelligence here formulated a few abstract concepts. What were they? Okay. Someone had to understand that in order to have an ordered form of life based on, or not based upon, but represented within an intricate and elegant code, okay, in order to build that out of the turmoil that existed in the environment before life, the first abstract concept was an understanding that we needed to find a place of stability. Okay? Okay, and once we could establish a situation somewhere within this environment where we had enough stability to do some coding, we had to have a sense of direction. Okay? What I'm trying to say is that the code was not developed in a random fashion, haphazard fashion. Okay? The coding that was developed had a direction toward the goals of the paradons. Okay, now what else? We needed a counter an event counter, a clock, okay? Direction couldn't go on forever within this world, the world of time and space and limits, okay? The direction had to stop at the right moment so that it could reproduce another bit of code moving in the same direction. So we need a counter. Simple enough concept, okay? Okay, what we're going to show is, even though the paradigms possess the extraordinary capabilities we mentioned before, what we're going to show is that they were confronted with many obstacles because of the environment in which they wanted to implement a system that would achieve their goals. Okay, we have to remember, if we put ourselves in their place, we have a very tenuous grasp or influence upon this environment. Okay, to get some coding started, within this environment. Well, it's analogous to landing a, like a 12-pound trout on a 2-pound line. Okay, initially we had to just wait until the proper elements came into the proper proximity. Okay, exercise our influence on them. Our influence being something like only being able to introduce a hydrogen atom. All right, now, we knew what kind of coding we wanted to write. Now, the coding of it within itself was just an abstract concept, doesn't mean anything. Coding cannot normally within itself decode itself. So we had to hand build, by being patient with the elements initially, some coding. We had to establish within the coding a counter. Okay, and then we had to also hand build some kind of a machine to read the code. Okay, now as we know, within our Earth environment there are no machines. We don't have any perpetual, there are machines. There are no perpetual motion machines. You have to plug your washing machine into the wall. You have to put gasoline in your automobile. Okay, so what we had to do was by hand, very patiently, with our minute influence on the elements, put together a fundamental machine which required fuel. Okay? And the evidence seems to indicate that the paradigm selected to use photons coming from the sun as the fuel. Machine as a decoder. Okay, the coding assembles amino acids into protein. That's what it will do, basically. The counter tells the coding and the machine when to start and stop. Okay, now that's what we're going to get into in subsequent discussions, is the difficulties in achieving these things initially. Okay, then the difficulties in particularly in achieving this kind of thing within that environment. A lot of problems. And these are the real problems, I feel, that should be addressed when we're pursuing the story of the origin and purpose of life. Okay, now what should be addressed, essentially, is how the code was written to meet the challenges of the environment, rather than what the environment has been doing to the code to accidentally create something that exists efficiently within the environment. Okay, by considering the existence of coders, we can take all the evidence that's been collected by scientists, all the archaeological records, all the microbiological knowledge. We can tie the two together, and we can show how the code developed step by step in response to challenges presented by the environment, obstacles presented by the environment to achieving the goal of the code. It's going to be interesting as we develop this to show how, in contrast with the first problem of getting the coding started, hand building a machine, a counter, and doing some hand coding, in contrast to that, even after the code is well established, the lack of direct influence on the physical world by these people presents interesting obstacles to the improvement of the code. And at some point we'll get to the old chicken and the egg paradox. We're even going to answer the question when we get to that point of what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Hi, you've just watched my story, and I'm going to stick to it except for one thing. Maybe instead of talking about the hydrogen atom, we should be considering the Higgs field. And this is the blackboard from 34 years ago. Came across it during a house cleaning recently. It reminded me of the tape that you just watched. Regarding the origin of life, considering Darwin's evolution and intelligent design. A few comments are in order. The central problem for Darwinism is how to get life out of the elements in the periodic table through a simple process of accident and chance. The intelligent design advocates, however, also have a problem in determining or deciding how the intelligent agent got life from the same elements in the periodic table. Darwinists, at least the ones I have read, have been waiting for some kind of a breakthrough, an enlightenment, where all of the pieces of the puzzle will fall together and we'll be able to create life. I believe the future has passed. The enlightened concept happened in 1996, or at least was published in a book in 1996 by Professor Michael Behe in Darwin's Black Box. It's the concept of irreducible complexity. Unfortunately, irreducible complexity is a difficult concept for most intelligent people. It's kind of like a case of pluralistic ignorance. Dr. Behe tried to illustrate it, simplify it, by using a mousetrap as an example. That didn't work. People thought that the mousetrap could be used as a tie clip, etc., etc. In either case, the tie clip was irreducibly complex, as was the mousetrap. I'm going to try to simplify the concept. Here I have a nut and a bolt, okay? The nut evolves over here, the bolt evolves over here. They're separated in space and time. If the nut is evolved in accordance with Mr. Whitworth, and the bolt is evolved in accordance with Mr. SAE, the two will never fit together, will not form a system. However, if both the nut and bolt are designed to some specification, they will fit together, forming an irreducibly complex system. The key is that all irreducibly complex systems are goal-oriented. In a manner of speaking, every component of the system has knowledge of adjacent components. The designer assures that all parts mesh. Most of the time, that is. Occasionally, because the designer's nature is not deterministic, you'll get the occasional two-headed cow. A few words on my own insight, and I'll be done. It all started a few years before the Beyond Paradox tape. I made a bologna and cheese sandwich. Got another prop here. It's a bologna and cheese sandwich. Some white bread, American cheese, bologna, mustard, and butter, and another slice of white bread. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania. One August, late in August, I made my sandwich and I went outdoors to eat it. And before I could eat the sandwich, before I could even sit down, a yellow jacket wasp showed up and tried to help me eat the sandwich. No matter how much I waved him off, he kept coming back. And I started wondering what's gone on in that wasp brain of his. And it occurred to me that he has no knowledge or no concept of human being. In other words, as far as he's concerned, I'm a combination of chemical cues from the bologna sandwich, light and shadow from my waving hand. He has some idea of how to get back home, but that's about it for the wasp. I don't exist. So, mapping the wasp experience to my own wasp brain, I wonder if there were things around me that were outside of my perception. Over time, these things became the paradons, who are metaphors for the unknowns beyond the edge of science. What I mean is, at the boundaries of science, scientists are nibbling at God's bologna and cheese sandwich. See you later. Bye.